Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, I have a quick question for you. In light of the recent events, I want to hear your thoughts. How do you think toxic polarization is fueling political violence in our society today? It's super easy to share your perspective. Just scroll down in the show notes and click on the Send Us a Text Message link. You can do it right from inside your podcast player, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other app. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Now, let's start the show. Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is a bonus episode about when listen to the other side isn't enough and what we can do about it. You know, recent events have us all feeling overwhelmed. The news is on fire, social media is a war zone, and frankly, some of you have reached out feeling burnt out on the whole listen to the other side advice. We hear you. You've been trying to engage in civil discourse, and it feels like it's not working. You're asking, what now? Is there something more we can do? That's why we're calling an emergency panel today on the Outrage Overload podcast. I'm your host, David Beckmeyer, and we've brought together some amazing guests. Friends of the show, Phyllis Leavitt, author of America in Therapy, and Lisa Swallow, founder of Crossing Party Lines and author of the workbook, Yes, You Can Talk Politics. Together, we're going to explore why these strategies might feel ineffective right now and what tools you might be missing to navigate this incredibly heated landscape. We'll examine the impact of constant outrage on our ability to connect and create positive change. Because here's the thing, even in these difficult times, there's still a way forward. We might just need to adjust our approach. So let's dive in and get some answers. I'm so glad both of you could be on the show today. Both of you have been on the show before. Phyllis Leavitt, you were here earlier, and Lisa Swallow, you were as well. Phyllis, when you were here before, your book, we talked about your book, but I don't think it was available yet, and now it is available, right?
Right. It just became available at the beginning of the month.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And so I assume it's kind of available everywhere. Probably everybody starts at Amazon, but sometimes I say, well, you don't have to get it on Amazon. You can probably,
Right.
if you're an anti-Amazon person, there's probably another way to get the book.
Any major bookseller at this point, I think, has it. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Thank you.
You know, and Lisa, you were on a while back when we talked about Crossing Party Lines and introduced that to the audience. And, you know, I haven't got a lot of feedback on that episode yet because it hasn't been out long enough, but I kind of expect I will, but I have been getting a lot of feedback in this general topic or this and a few others. But one of the general topics I've been getting a lot of feedback in is you keep telling us we need to listen to the other side. You keep telling us, you know, we're going to have these conversations, and I've been doing that, and look where it got me. And so I think you're not being fair. You have to tell us something better than that, or it's not working. What can we do? So which of you would like to sort of jump onto that or a response to that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things we're seeing right now is more about the outrage we're feeling than simply about listening, because we could have all these great successful conversations where we listen to one another, we learn from one another, and yet look what happens in politics. Look what the Supreme Court does. Look what each of our candidates is doing. It's not impacting politics, and that could make it seem like it's not successful as well. So even if it's a great conversation, look what's happening in the world today.
Well, yeah, you have this kind of sense that nothing really changes. And I've talked to folks that have sort of been working in these areas, bridge building, other kinds of things, depolarization, things like that for many years. And it can be, you know, difficult to identify, or, you know, part of it is our negativity bias as well. Like our brain is tuned to negativity. So we have to really hunt for those success stories in our brain a little bit. But often it feels like, you know, it's not having much effect. And sometimes even when it can be effect in our personal lives, it doesn't help us, it doesn't help the world. It doesn't help what we see as this sort of larger political landscape. And sometimes that can be, like, okay, well, I don't hate my neighbor now, but these same political things still happen. And Phyllis, I loved, when we first talked and we first met. I mean, I love the title, this American Therapy, as sort of a metaphor, just for where we need to be and how we can get there. And I don't know, now that your book is out, what kind of feedback are you getting along those lines?
Well, a lot of the feedback I get, of course, is from people that are like-minded. So, but I have been on a couple of, not too many, but a couple of podcasts where I think that the host of the show is coming from a more conservative mindset, and still have felt very well received and very respected, and had a lot of agreement. So, one of the things that I really stress is that the issue of mental health, the issue of psychology and psychotherapy, it really is a nonpartisan point of view. It's really about healing relationship. It's about healing our own wounds that we bring to relationship that account, I think, for a large part for the kind of divisiveness and threats of violence and inability and unwillingness to hear one another in the first place. I think those are fundamentally mental health issues because mentally healthy people have a tolerance for disagreement. They have a tolerance for conflict. They have a tolerance for not getting their way. We might not like it. We might suffer. We might feel stress or anger or fear, but we don't necessarily act out. Mentally healthy people don't act out in those kind of circumstances. And they're committed whenever possible to staying at the table to try to resolve whatever the conflict is, or leaving each other alone in peace. And we're not seeing that happening. And so I look at the two big things that I look at, and well, there's probably 100 things that I look at in my book, but the two big things that I'm looking at are, what are the wounds that we're inflicting on people that are causing them to be so intolerant and so violent, or so passively submissive to things that are unhealthy. And what is happening in the whole family of America using the family systems model that is contributing to this. And because I really think people don't have the education they need about our psychological makeup and functioning. And that's one of the main purposes of my book, among many. But I think, when we discovered that a plague could be carried in a water supply, then we looked at the water supply. It wasn't one person causing a plague, it was the water supply. So what did we do then to clean up the water? And I think there's a plague, in a way, of threats of violence and divisiveness and hatefulness and discrimination. And we have to look at what is the main supply of that from a psychological point of view. So those are like big picture things. And I know you deal with the specifics of the communication, and I deal with that too. But that's kind of an overview there.
Well, yeah, we definitely talk about the big picture here as well. And, I would say there's a lot of threads there, and I'll try to, I don't know how many I'm going to be able to pull on today, but it definitely, I had a lot of things going through my mind while each one of those kind of pop things, different things in my head. But when you opened up there, I do want to say that, yeah, I think these kind of concerns, we sometimes call it scaling. In other words, it sort of scales across the political spectrum, so it applies to people on left and right. Now, right now, because some of the most recent things, I'm getting a lot of feedback from people probably that lean more left and are, kind of concerned about some of the most recent things that have happened. But if you look at some of these, the kinds of complaints you see people making, I've gotten a lot of those from people on the conservative side. I mean, many times they feel, you know, maybe something that Joe Biden did or something else that's been some kind of a catastrophe and it's not getting enough attention. They can feel like they're being gaslit when they're told, your issues aren't important, or you're a crazy person, and stuff like that. So, and a lot of those same kind of sentiments clearly apply. And one thing I wanted to say on that, and Lisa, you may have other things to reply to what Phyllis said too, so feel free to jump in on that. But one thing I was thinking about there as well is that, I'm really hearing people say that as if it's mutually exclusive to sort of have this understanding, of folks with different viewpoints is somehow mutually exclusive to working on, whatever advocacy you want to do. Like, sometimes like you can do both. Like you can do both. And in fact, a lot of, I know Lisa, I'm pretty sure Lisa, I've heard you say things along these lines that if you want to be an advocate, understanding the other side is sort of a prerequisite to that, or you'll be better at it if you understand the other side. The simple thing of saying, if all you do is go online and say Trump is bad or Biden is bad every day, it's not really going to have any effect. It's actually not going to change any Trump supporters' minds or any Biden supporters' minds, right? It's not really helping anything, and it's not getting you anywhere. I sometimes want to have to remind people of that. Like, no one on this show is saying you shouldn't be an advocate. And hopefully this idea of understanding the other side will help you be a better advocate.
Yeah, I think also that one of the things that comes out of understanding the other side is a deeper understanding of ourselves. When we understand ourselves more, when we understand what we're most afraid of politically, what we're most concerned about, that will help us advocate in the space that's going to make us feel most empowered and ideally make the biggest difference and change the system that we're so upset about. Because typically what's going on in politics right now is not outrage at a particular person, unless that's a candidate. It's more outrage at the situation, at feeling as though our representatives are not truly representing us, that there's no one to vote for that really represents us, that the Supreme Court or our legislator is, again, doing something that goes against our best interest. So it's more systemic. And when we're outraged against a system, it's hard to act in a way that will really make a difference. But if we get to understand the issue more deeply through talking to other people, understanding ourselves more deeply, we can say, oh, wait a minute, there is this part of this problem that I have the ability to make a difference in. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier, David, was that there are a lot of people who are interested in changing the way we vote, alternative voting methods. And they're doing that because they've done the self-work to identify that one of the things they're upset about is the two-party system, that leaves them feeling unrepresented. So let's change the two-party system. That's something that I can do locally, I can advocate for. So now I'm becoming empowered and I'm making a difference and moving to taking my outrage energy and translating it into something that leaves me being a positive change in the world.
Yeah, and if I can just jump in on that kind of from a psychological point of view, I think that powerlessness in general, when people experience powerlessness, they're more likely to experience rage.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're saying is so important, that people really feel like there's something they can do with the outrage they feel, or the fear that they feel, or the anger that they feel, or the lack of representation, or whatever it is, that we have some place to go to do something. And for different people, it's different. Like for me, it was writing this book and talking about some of the underlying family dynamics that I think contribute to escalating violence and divisiveness, and what are some of the healing principles that we could apply as a country. And for somebody, some of my friends do the thing where they write the postcards to people who haven't voted, and other people are in demonstrations, and other people are doing what you're doing, and I think there's a place for everybody, depending on what we're called to, but to support each other, to go where you're called to make a difference, and take your powerlessness and turn it into action.
Well, something you said earlier about, mentally healthy people, don't suffer some of these challenges. And
Well, they
so,
suffer, but they don't necessarily act out.
oh, I see. Right. They don't overreact or act out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. You're right. We still have the challenges. But, and
Absolutely.
so what are some, so I guess, you can't summarize your whole book or an entire discipline in a short
Right.
response, but
Right.
are there any kind of quick little guidelines that, people can maybe use to center themselves? Maybe it's just some meditation or something else. I mean, any little quick little guidelines
Well,
that might help us?
some of it dovetails with what you're saying, Lisa. But one of the underlying premises of my book is that a lot of what's happening in the country today mirrors exactly what happens in an abusive family. Somebody has all the power. They hurt other people. They don't feel remorse for what they do. They feel entitled to whatever they're doing that hurts other people. The people that they hurt become symptomatic, and then they blame them for their symptoms and hurt them worse because they're symptomatic. They silence truth tellers, sometimes, very, very violently, shame them, blame them, call them liars or hurt them physically. And they also enroll people to go along with them, whether it's out of fear or they've been brainwashed or whatever. So we're actually seeing a lot of abuse family dynamics playing out in our country. And the purpose of calling that out is not to blame people. It's not to say this person's bad or evil. The purpose is to say what causes what perpetuates an abusive family dynamic on whatever level it's occurring, and how do we interrupt it? Because the bottom, and there's so many things that I talk about, so I'll try to pick some important ones. What we know from family therapy is that the most symptomatic people, the people who are the most powerless or who are the most aggressive or are the most addicted or who are the most fearful or obsessed or whatever they do that's extreme, or murderous or suicidal, the most symptomatic people are actually the ones calling for help for the family. And this is a known psychological phenomenon. It's called, those people who are the most symptomatic are called the identified patient. And in our society, we look at our identified patients, whether they're the people who just go along with someone who's a bully or they are the bully. We look at, or they're, a rapist or a murderer. We look at them as if they're just bad people, and we condemn them rather than looking at them as the tip of a big iceberg of family dysfunction. And the real way to address it is to address the family dysfunction from the point of view of healing. What happened to people that caused them to become so maladaptive socially and relationally? What happened to them? How do we break the cycle of abuse and neglect rather than just targeting further people who are already victims and they're acting out in one way or another? And I say this, very clearly because I have been a therapist for over 30 years. There is a victim inside the perpetrator. And if we don't, as a society, commit to looking at that and understanding that and helping the victim inside the perpetrator when we can, and there's people we don't know how to help, then we won't be able to break this cycle.
As I hear you talking about this, Phyllis, I'm reminded of some conversations we've had at Crossing Party Lines. And as an intro, we had a fundraiser that was canceled. It was at a pizza place, but they canceled it because the people who run the pizza shop said, "Oh, wait a minute! I read about you guys. You would probably allow Nazis to show up." And I said, "Actually, we would. We want anyone who comes through the door to show up." And the rationale is someone who is that extreme is generally that extreme because they have felt as though they don't belong anywhere. There is nowhere else they can belong.
Right.
And by creating a place that they can be heard, that they can be understood, and they can belong, we give them opportunities to step away from the more, if not violent, at least extreme actions that they've been taking, and views that they're taking, and start becoming a little more part of a Crossing Party Lines group. Our group is defined not by a political view, but by the belief that we are better informed and better at democracy when we can listen to other people's views, not just hear them, but also understand them. So what we do at Crossing Party Lines when we have anyone who is somewhat extreme in their views is we listen to them. We ask them about their views, and we don't just ask them to explain the views, the facts of their views. We ask them, help us understand why this makes sense to you, how you see it playing out, what are your personal experiences that lead you to believe this is the right approach? And people feel heard. They feel less isolated, and the people listening start going, oh, I can understand the human side of that view that I was so terrifying to me before. It's less terrifying because I understand a bit more about where it's coming from. Um, and sometimes, the stories can get very deep. They can get about childhood abuse, and we can go, oh, wow, I can really, really grok why this person is coming from this particular place. So, yeah, Phyllis, everything you're saying really aligns with what we discover in our political conversations at Crossing Party Lines. So we don't do the deep dive into mental health so much as just providing a place to belong, a place to be heard, a place to learn about others and feel like we're all in this together, regardless of where we stand politically.
Which is actually a part of mental health. They're really inseparable, right? So I think that's really beautiful. And I had a little bit of exposure, read a little bit about the Braver Angels, which I don't know if they're similar to what you do, but they also bring red and blue together to talk. And one of the accounts that I read, the woman said, who was a participant, she said, when we really listened, we just weren't all that different. And I think that's one of the beauties of what you're doing and any commitment to actually crossing the divide and hearing each other. And of course, that's the bottom line in any good family therapy or couples therapy, is making it safe and respected for people to be heard and to just have the other party listen deeply the way they want to be heard. And I think that's something that gets lost, is people have not learned how to listen the way they want to be heard or speak the way they want to be spoken to. And when they're in a safe environment where that can happen, then I think there's much more possibility for healing in the relationship. And just one quick thing I wanted to add is that, one of the bottom lines that I have discovered as a therapist over many, many years, and you probably have discovered these same things yourselves in your line of work, is that the bottom line is all of our wounds, all of the worst wounds that cause people to act out or self-sabotage, come from some injury to love and belonging and safety and cooperation and nonviolence. All of our wounds come from those places, and they're healed through love and belonging and safety and cooperation and nonviolence. And so that's what, when you provide that safe arena for people to actually listen to each other, you're helping heal on that very deep level. And we need more and more of that.
Yeah. David, I just real quick wanted to make a statement because I know some listeners may be attuned to this concept of safe space. And in my mind, Phyllis, I don't think you're talking about what the politically charged safe space is. More what we tried to make a differentiation between the safe space that people think of and what we create, and we call it a brave space. And the primary difference is we're brave enough to let other people make mistakes, which means we can make mistakes. Because when we're learning new skills, we're going to do it incorrectly. We may not understand each other clearly, so we just give people the benefit of the doubt. We give them a chance to do a do-over. So it's brave because that means we might hear something we don't like, and we have to sit back and say, can you repeat that? Because I'm not sure you meant that, because it felt hurtful to me. Can you repeat it in a different way? And it does come out again that second time a little more compassionate. So I just wanted to comment on that concept of a safe space.
I love that. I love defining it that way, because I also think that when people have a chance to heal anything of their own wounding, that we become more tolerant of other people being imperfect, because we know our own imperfection, because we're just not perfect as human beings, and nobody has all the answers or is always right. And to the extent that we can let go of some of that, the opportunity is there for a much more connected relationship with other people, and forgiveness and tolerance and, all the things that we desperately need.
Yeah, and along those lines, I think it's sort of related. And when we talked before, Lisa, you talked about this, and also, of course, I've learned about it from the work that I've done at Cross Party Lines. But this idea that there's also this sort of being truthful about it and not having kind of an underlying agenda, like that there isn't a sort of, you were saying that some people have found with other groups they've stumbled into that they said they wanted to listen, but really they wanted to convert. And the crossing party lines is very clear that that's not there, and that's not the intention. It truly is to listen, and I think when we're doing that in any other environment, we have to somehow make that intention clear as well and believe it. Like it means telling yourself that first, right? Are you really here to convert them, or are you truly here to listen, right? Because, many times we think we're there to listen, but really we're there to convert. So I think that's a huge aspect of it.
I think also be nice to yourself, because you might go into it with the intention to listen. You might get triggered, and then you start becoming defensive, and then you have to take an opportunity to take a deep breath and say, oh, now I remember I'm here to listen. And the fact that you get triggered and sucked into being defensive or trying to change someone's mind doesn't mean you didn't start out with the right intention. It means you just have to come back to it.
Yeah, and I think it's also the hardest thing for most of us to do. So yeah, give ourselves a lot of slack for, falling back and coming forward again, because I think it's really hard not to want to convince people that you're right, because we all think we are, but the other person thinks they are too, right?
Right. I mean, many times we're going into these conversations and we're sort of bristling. We're just like, I'm going to say the right thing because I am going to make sure they see my side as, and we're not relaxed. We're not really thinking clearly. A lot of times we have a pre-canned, so we find ourselves in these political conversations sort of going in like that. And when you can begin to build that trust in a dialogue, it's so different. If both sides can start to get that trust a little bit, but it can be hard to do in politics. I mean, you kind of opened up with that, Phyllis, that's everything's politics.
It's hard to do in our own lives. Really, right? So of course it's hard to do in politics, because in your own life with some of the people, like your husband or your kids or your friends or whoever, your employer, um, there's a stake in having the relationship work. And I think with a lot of the divisiveness that's going on, there isn't a stake in having it work. And I think, there's more of a stake in somebody's going to win and the other person's just going to lose. And so I think we have to really talk about the value of it being a win-win where everybody gets heard, and there it really is a win-win, and somebody doesn't walk out of the discussion or the room or the Congress or whatever with their tail between their legs, feeling like they were humiliated or shamed or blamed or whatever.
Yeah. So I make a promise to my listeners that I'm going to help them be less stressed out about outrage media and outrage in their life. So right now, people are almost seeking that kind of content out. They're like, oh, I'm mad, so I want to see some more content showing me how the other side is bad and doing bad things. So we've got Jerry in the Midwest. We've got Alex in Texas. We've got Dave in upstate New York. So let's just talk to those listeners and say, what can we do to help to maybe tune in less to that kind of content or be a little bit immune to it if you are going to tune in?
I'm not sure it's possible to become fully immune to it. I mean, the people who are putting out the content designed to get us outraged, they're really smart. They know what they're doing. They mine big data. They use artificial intelligence. They're going to find a way to push our buttons no matter who we are. So first off, accept that your buttons are going to get pushed, that you are going to get outraged. I think another thing that I'm going to say, which Phyllis, you may go totally against this, but I'd like to say that it's okay to feel outrage. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to seek out the stuff that makes you feel it even more for a little while. But really, outrage, anger, these are, Brene Brown calls them catalyst emotions. They are emotions that can launch us into something more healthy. So once we've experienced enough of the outrage that we've got our juices flowing, you say, I'm really going to do something. This really has me upset. Now let's move into the action. And the action part of it is saying, what's underneath this? What do I care most about? What am I most frustrated by? What is it that's happened that is something that I feel is totally wrong. The more we can understand our rage, the more we can then mine it for the next step, which is, okay, now what can I do with this energy that I've got and this understanding of what I'm upset about? How can I translate this into something that will empower me? So if we take outrage as a launching point, as a catalyst for moving us forward, that can be the energy that's going to get us to say, I really am going to talk to that person on the other side, or I really am going to go out and send postcards, or I really am going to do something. But take it and translate it into action, and then it's going to support us as human beings.
I totally agree with you. I don't disagree with you at all. I think anger and pain and fear are great motivators if we use them, like you said, in a constructive way. Absolutely. And we're going to feel them. It's human to feel those things. If you feel something is unjust or frightening or threatening, or just plain, inhumane and cruel and wrong. Absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
Well,
I mean,
I'll do a little bit of a yes and on it. I'll say that outrage is absolutely that kind of a tool, but it is the sort of dialed up to 11 problem too. That if you're just sort of swimming in it, it's not achieving that goal anymore. So yeah, exactly like you're saying. You want to try to, if you can, convert it into action. I would say, and the second part of that is, let's make the action a little more than just a tweet.
Oh,
right.
for
Right.
sure, because you want to make it an action that is actually going to have a chance of making a difference. And that's one of the things that I've been looking at is how do we take these huge things that we're upset about? They're really more situations and predicaments and systems. How do we take these things and then from that figure out what we can do as individuals to make a difference, not just to diffuse our anger by the tweet, but actually make a difference with the system. What changes can we make? Talking to other people, changing the whole mental health of the nation by learning to listen and talk. I think that is a really big thing, though many people will think, well, that doesn't make a lot of difference. It does. It adds up. It's really, really crucial. But so are things like I'm going to invest my time in alternative voting. I'm going to invest my time in helping people understand that there's a problem with our water system by getting the word out there. We have to dial down to what is something I can do that will make a difference. And I think one of the first tips, David, is to remind people to step away from labels and generalizations. When you are mad at a label, when you're using a generalization to be the thing that you're focusing your energy on, you can't go anywhere. There's no one to hold accountable. There's no action that you can take because it's so amorphous. So we need to dial back to what are the specific people, the specific institutions, the specific groups within the government that we want to address. So be more specific. So that's one tip to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of the sort of actors that sort of benefit from this kind of keeping us riled up, they often kind of try to frame things that there's a bad guy somewhere that you can point to one thing or something to be mad about. And I'm glad you mentioned, sort of think of it more like a complex system. And I know, Phillips, I believe that your book also does that as well, right? I mean, we're talking about a larger system. So when you have a complex system like that, you can't just say the left this and I'm going to yell at them, or the right that and I'm going to yell at them. That doesn't work. So that's kind of the labeling you're talking about. But it's also, we don't want to fall into, just like you're saying, find an action. Just because it's a complex system, you can't change it all at one time. But that complex system is made up of lots of little parts. So you can work on a little part somewhere. Maybe that's a little part in your community. I mean, maybe it's easier to participate in the school board or the fire department or potholes on your street. I mean, there may be things you can do in the community because some of these national problems sometimes are harder to kind of figure out where my place is. What can I do? So that's another option, I think, there when you talk about action. And so I kind of just wanted to point some of that out because I think that's absolutely great advice. But we do have to help. We have to keep in mind that many of the I call them bad actors, but they really benefit from this kind of stuff. They try to frame it in ways that aren't really realistic, and then sometimes we end up pointing the problem like at our neighbor, like our neighbor has nothing to do with it. But we don't. When it is that larger complex system, we kind of find one person and we think they represent this whole thing, and it's never a good It's never a realistic approximation of the real world.
Yeah, and I think part of the way we're looking at it psychologically right now is to look at the microcosm and the macrocosm. The microcosm being the individual and the individual family or small community, and the national and international scene, because the dynamics that are healthy or unhealthy are playing out on all levels. So if you're addressing it just in your own home, great. If you're writing to your senator, if you're campaigning, if you're in a march, if you're writing articles or doing what you're doing, Lisa, which is fabulous, um, it all contributes, and we don't all do the national thing. Some people are just being better parents. Great. They're raising healthier children who are going to be more cooperative members of society. And there's other people who are writing books about great parenting, so there's a place for all of it, and we need both, because our families in America really need a lot of healing. There is a lot of abuse, a lot of neglect, a lot of really dysfunctional family dynamics, a lot of intergenerational trauma that's not being interrupted, that needs significant help. And the more we help families in America, the more we are helping from the ground up to create a more healthy society. And the more we call out abuse on a larger level and propose constructive solutions and not just target people or blame, then we're working, I think, in both ways that really need a lot of attention right now, both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So I hope Dave in New York is less stressed out now, or has some tools to be less stressed out. Um, but yeah, so I guess we kind of need to wrap up because it's I'm trying to keep these episodes to reasonable length. So I don't know what the best closing is. I think we've said a lot of important things. I love this, remembering that it's a complex system and you can't just sort of push one button and fix it all. I think that we have to really keep that in mind. It's a very complex system. There's lots of moving parts, but we can have impact to some of those moving parts, even if we can't fix it all at once.
Right.
I think that's really, really important because Phyllis, you listed a whole bunch of individual things we can all do. We can all do something. We can all make a difference. When we start to feel like we're not making a difference despite these things that we're doing, that can be very frustrating. So, David, yes, remember that this is a system. Every little bit that you do differently is going to make a change. So
Right.
take your outrage, translate it into some kind of action that has a real impact, even if it's just on one person's life, and then keep on going. The worst thing you can do is feel outrage and then fuel it with more outrage and put tweets out there that, those are not actions that are going to make you feel better or that are going to help the world.
Right. And feeling powerless just really destroys people, on so many levels. And so any action that we can take that feels constructive, that feels helpful, large or small, actually helps heal our own mental health. Um, and I just wanted to share a story that on the small level, I read a story about a man who had committed suicide. And when they went to his home afterwards, there was a note that he left there. And he said, I'm going to commit suicide, but if one person smiles at me on the way to the bridge he jumped off of or whatever, I won't do it. And nobody did. And so we don't know. He could be one person, there could be one person who's going to commit suicide. It could be one person who's going to commit homicide. So we can just all be that person, you know.
That's great. That's powerful. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Phyllis Leavitt and Lisa Swallow, for coming on the show. And I know that our contact info is easy to get, outrageoverload@gmail.com. And if you wanted me to forward any questions, I think Crossing Party Lines is pretty easy to get your contact info. And Phyllis, I think you maybe have a contact page or your contact info is on your website as well. So we'll make sure we have all those links if folks want to reach out. I know that, from everything we've talked about before, I know that you really want to help people. So if there's any specific questions that listeners have, feel free to reach out to me or Phyllis or Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really important work, David. Thank you for this.
Really
Thank you.
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Phyllis.
That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. The outrage machine can leave us feeling drained and hopeless. But remember, you're not powerless. There are ways to break free from the negativity spiral. Let's combat negativity with positivity. We all need a good dose of hope these days, so head over to our social media pages, Facebook or Instagram, @Outrage Overload, and share a positive news story that inspired you. Scroll down in the show notes and find the Send Us a Text Message link. It could be anything, big or small. Let's create a community that uplifts and supports each other in staying off the negativity spiral. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.